They said she would never survive. They said power belongs to the corrupt. They said honesty is a weakness that gets buried in court files and police cells. But they never knew a girl raised in the house of a monster could become the fire that burns the entire system. Before she became a president, before the world screamed her name, she was just a forgotten daughter of the most feared and most bribed politician the country ever produced. She never asked to be his child. She never asked to carry his blood. And one day she cut every tie and walked away, believing that freedom comes not from birth but from choices. But when she finally became the cleanest leader the nation had ever seen, when she refused every suitcase filled with cash, when she signed laws that shook billionaires and exposed judges, when she stood alone against the system her father once ruled, they broke her, framed her, dragged her into a cell, and destroyed everything she built. They called her corrupt, even though she never took a single coin. They bruised her, interrogated her, and tried to silence her. In the darkness of a prison room, with no light, no sound, no protection, she whispered one promise: I will return, and the truth will burn all of you. That was not the beginning of her pain, nor the end of her courage. That was just the moment everything changed. Her name is Ayla Mir, daughter of the most corrupt politician in modern history. The girl who walked away from a palace of dirty money and built her life from hunger, sleepless nights, and small victories. She started with nothing. No friends, no family, no trust, no shelter. She cleaned floors, studied at night, ate cheap food, survived breakdowns, and built a movement against the same corruption that once lived in her own house. People loved her because she was real. She listened, and she never lied. Where most politicians bought crowds, she earned hearts. Where her father threatened districts, she protected victims. Where ministers demanded loyalty, she demanded accountability. And slowly, the country began to believe that maybe, just maybe, honesty could win. When she finally ran for president, they laughed at her. A woman, honest, without a family name? You can't win. But the crowds were louder than the media. The streets were stronger than the elite. And the truth was heavier than money. On election night, when her victory was announced, millions cried. Hope had a face. The system had a challenger. And corruption had an enemy with no price tag. But power doesn't lose quietly. The same men she exposed, the same businessmen she refused, the same judges she challenged, they came together with one secret plan: destroy the only clean leader before she becomes unstoppable. The trap didn't need bullets. It only needed lies. Ayla was born in a house full of polished marble, expensive cigars, glass tables always covered with files full of stolen money and sealed envelopes. She didn't know what corruption was when she was a child. She only knew that every time someone rang the doorbell after midnight, her father smiled and locked himself in his office. And in the morning there would be new cars, new furniture, new servants, and a little bit less humanity in the walls. She saw ministers laugh like hyenas, judges whisper in dark corners, businessmen bow with fear in their eyes. But she never saw truth. Not once. The first time she understood something was wrong was when she was 12 and overheard her mother crying, "This money is going to cost us our souls." Ayla Mir never cared. For him, money was oxygen, fear was power, and honesty was stupidity. Allah watched him buy elections, silence journalists, destroy rivals, and show off charity just to hide crimes. She swore she would never become like him. When she was 19, she left without a suitcase full of cash, without property documents, without a single stolen rupee, just her books, her ID card, and a heart full of questions nobody in that mansion could answer. The day she walked out, her father didn't even stop her. He just looked at her once and said, "The world will eat you alive without me." She replied, "I'd rather be eaten than poisoned." That night she slept in a rented room that smelled of dust and hopelessness. But at least it was clean. Clean of lies, clean of deals, clean of blood money. She worked small jobs, waitressing, data entry, translating documents, anything to pay rent. She studied in libraries because she couldn't afford internet. She skipped meals but never skipped books. Sometimes she cried silently after midnight, wondering if she made a mistake leaving everything behind. But every time she remembered a suitcase full of cash being exchanged in her father's office, her heart hardened again. She graduated with honors, and instead of chasing a high-paying job, she went straight into the streets helping victims of bribery. Women whose husbands were jailed for refusing to pay, laborers who lost land, teachers who got fired for refusing political orders. She started recording stories, documenting evidence, speaking to lawyers who hadn't yet sold their conscience. Slowly, a movement formed around her. Students first, then shopkeepers, then villagers, then whistleblowers, and finally honest officers who knew corruption from the inside. She created digital platforms to expose cases. She held public meetings where people told their stories. She confronted police stations and government offices with cameras. First local channels covered her, then national media. They called her the enemy of the powerful and the daughter who rebelled against. "Are you related to Senator Ayla Mir?" She paused, took a breath, and said, "Yes. And I am everything he is not." The clip went viral. Millions watched it. Some clapped, some cursed, some laughed, but nobody ignored her. That was the first time her father heard her voice in years. He crushed the glass he was holding and whispered, "So this is war." Allah didn't know, but from that moment, every step she took was being monitored. Every ally she made was being watched. Every word she spoke was being recorded. Because corrupt power doesn't fear police, doesn't fear courts, doesn't fear elections, it only fears someone who cannot be bought. The more truth she exposed, the more enemies she created. But she also created believers. People were tired of lies. They were hungry for someone clean. When she announced she was running for office, hundreds didn't just support her, they volunteered. They printed banners, they knocked doors, they donated small amounts because they knew every coin was clean. She won her first election without spending dirty money, and the political world stared in shock. They thought it was a fluke. They thought she would break. They thought she would compromise. But she didn't. Instead, she wrote laws that made bribery impossible to hide. She opened financial records to the public. She fired officials with decades of immunity. She scared the system. Within 5 years, she went from unknown activist to national leader. And then came the historic moment, the presidential announcement. Her voice echoed in stadiums. "I don't want power. I want responsibility." Students cried in rallies. Women held her posters in markets. Elderly men said, "Maybe our children will live in a country better than ours." She won the presidency by the highest margin in modern history. But power doesn't forgive humiliation. Somewhere, in private offices and smoke-filled rooms, the same people she exposed made a plan so perfect that even angels would fail to see the trap. They didn't need evidence. They needed a narrative. And one night, when Allah was working late in the presidential office, the door burst open. Officers surrounded her desk. "You are under arrest for corruption, money laundering, misuse of authority." She didn't even lift her head at first. She thought it was a joke. "Check every record," she said calmly. "I never took a coin." But corruption doesn't care about truth. They dragged her outside in front of cameras. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared straight at the world and said, "I will prove everything, even if I die doing it." But jail was not paperwork. Jail was brutality. Dark halls, metal doors, screams in the night, interrogations without sleep, threats without pause. They wanted one thing before. In that darkness, she made a vow: "If I ever walk out of this place alive." Trophies of dirty victories. Senator Ayla Mir smiled, thinking he had won. He didn't know his biggest mistake wasn't raising a corrupt heir. His biggest mistake was letting an honest daughter live. Days in prison are not counted by sunrise or sunset. They are counted by screams behind walls, by footsteps of guards who don't carry keys but carry orders. Allah wasn't treated like a president. She wasn't even treated like a human being. They kept the lights on for 72 hours straight so she could not sleep. They brought false witnesses, forged documents, and hidden microphones. 2 officers tried to intimidate her by saying, "Everyone talks eventually." She looked up with half-dried blood on her lip and whispered, "Then I'm not everyone." They tightened chains around her wrists, pulled her hair, and asked the same question again and again. "Who gave you money? Which foreign hand paid you?" She remained silent, not because she had no answer, but because she knew the truth had no price. And lies had no power over someone with nothing left to lose. Outside the prison walls, the country was in shock. News channels showed edited clips, manufactured evidence, and fake bank statements. One headline read, "The clean leader was dirty all along." Comment sections were burning. Some believed she was innocent. Some called her a traitor. Some asked, if she was clean, why did they arrest her? But a seed had already been planted. Doubt spreads faster than truth. Meanwhile, in a glass office with golden lamps, Senator Khalid Mir watched everything with a satisfaction he never got from money, revenge, a father's twisted final lesson. No one defeats the system he built. He visited the prison once, not officially, not publicly. In a hidden observation room behind a one-way mirror, he saw her sitting on a metal chair with bruises on her arms and dark circles under her eyes. He whispered to himself, "I warned you, Allah, the world will eat you alive." But on the other side of that mirror, Allah suddenly looked up, as if she could feel his presence through walls. She didn't see him, but she spoke into the air. "Whatever you think you won today, I will destroy tomorrow." That moment wasn't loud. It was silent, but it shifted everything. Because corruption expected fear, expected surrender, but got a promise of war. Days passed like poison, slow and deep. After 34 days of interrogation without results, they changed strategy. Not violence, isolation. They cut her off from newspapers, news, visitors, sunlight, a psychological cage. But they forgot something: fire needs oxygen, not company. In darkness, she built a map inside her mind. Every name of every corrupt judge she ever exposed. Every businessman she ever confronted. Every minister she ever refused a favor. Every police chief who ever threatened her, she remembered them like targets. She repeated them every night, like prayers. Outside, something unexpected was happening. The country started